So today we have some very interesting things to talk about. Some agent updates that might be coming or should be coming, and some big fracture changes as well that I'm sure some of you will have seen. And we're going to talk about them because they are very interesting. So these are in the PBE, and most changes that make it to the PBE get into the game. And so you can expect that these changes will probably come into the game. Maybe if they cause like a massive bug or something, they won't. But for the most part, you could probably expect that this is the way it's going to go. So let's talk about initiators and duelists and their flashes. And let's first of all talk about the overall philosophy of why Riot did this. Because I've seen some people be a bit confused at why they did this. But I think overall it's a very, very good change and a necessary change that needed to happen. Because essentially the aggressive initiators like Skye and KO and the flashing duelists, there was too much design overlap, and this has been seen in pro play as well, where KO is essentially just a better version of all of the flashing duelists. He just gives you more than they do, and we have seen, on multiple maps, no duelist comps running a KO, because again, he basically gives you those flashes that those other duelists do, but then does just a bit more overall than they do as well, and so he was just basically eating up all of Yoru, Reyna, and Phoenix's pick rate, right? And so that was kind of a big problem. So what they have decided to do is basically make the initiators more team-based and the duelists more selfish-based. And I think that is a very good philosophy change overall. So let's actually talk about the specifics. So Skye's Guiding Light is changing. For the max flash duration of Skye's Guiding Light now scales from 1.25 seconds to 2.25 seconds over a 0.75 seconds charge up after being cast. Now, for reference, Skye Flash used to be 2 seconds across the board, but now obviously if you do a short duration flash for how long the bird is flying, it'll be a short flash, and if you do a longer flash, it'll actually be a bit longer than it was before as well. Now, very quickly, this is what this will look like, right? Where you have this little bar here for Skye overall, so that you can see, okay, this is a short flash, this is a long flash. Now, when it comes to Skye and how people will use Skye, it's going to be quite interesting to see. You might get some people doing like big spins with the Skye flashes, right? Just to like get through this like period of it and then try and flash people like at this, right? And try and make it a pop flash, but just have it out for this long. Obviously that does come with a risk, but I'll be interested to see the different texts that people can kind of come up with of how to kind of, manipulate this to get the longer flash without, necessarily showing that you're about to flash them as well. That's going to be a very interesting thing to see. The Guiding Light can also no longer be shot or destroyed, which I guess is a nice little thing for Skye. And the unequipped delay out of the Guiding Light has increased from 0.75 seconds to 0.85 seconds. So this is like a crucial way of trying to nerf that solo play out of the flashes, because let's say you go for a shorter flash, you just pop flash someone. Now it's going to take you longer to get your gun out, so it'll be very tight to see whether you actually have enough time to kill that person if you're going with the shorter flash. With the longer flash, though, you still probably will have enough time, but then obviously your Skybird will have had to travel. They might be able to turn the flash. It will be interesting. It definitely is a nerf overall, but if you can create some interesting ways to get, the 2.25 seconds without, risking yourself and without showing the flash, then it could actually be even maybe a slight buff overall if, people can find interesting ways of abusing that. And the same thing is happening to KO as well. The underhand flash is going from 2 seconds to 1.25, and the overhand flash is getting increased a little bit to 2.25 seconds. And again, I think it'll be the exact same thing, where if you're sitting in a smoke, is there like a perfect angle where you can throw a left-hand flash and it will just like trickle along the floor and just get out of a smoke and then flash for the longer duration? You can essentially use it like an underhand one. I don't know. Maybe there is. People will be experimenting, I'm sure, because there was never any need to before. You could just underhand it. But now it will be interesting to see people try and experiment with how best to use the new overhand flashes. Can you get it so that it just sneaks out of a smoke in a perfect angle, right? And things like that. That will be very interesting to see overall. And then again, the same thing, the unequipped delay out of both flashes has been increased, it should say there, I think, to 8.85 seconds like Skye. But then they have also changed the duelists, and we'll start with Reyna. And Reyna, I'm sure some of you will be a bit concerned maybe that Reyna got buffed, because of course in ranked solo queue, things like that, a Reyna can just destroy a game and ruin a game, you might even say, in some instances. So yeah, this one is a bit interesting, but again, I think this is more of a philosophy shift. So the wind up on the near sight effect has increased, or decreased, I should say, 0.6 seconds to 0.4 seconds. So that just means basically the Leer will flash faster. The range restriction has been removed, so on maps like Icebox, Breeze, Pearl, even down Belong, I guess, you know, that could be a bit of a problem for you where, you know, things weren't flash, but now it's infinite, which is good. And then the near sight unequipped delay has decreased as well, so that, again, is kind of the inverse of what they're doing for Skye and KO, where your gun will be out much, much faster, and, you know, you can basically play off those flashes. You know, you can flash, peek around that corner, and your gun will straight be out, and you can go for it. But the duration has decreased from 2.6 to 2 seconds. So again, kind of the inverse of what they're doing for those initiators, where the duelist flashes are just getting a bit shorter. But actually for Yoru, they're basically just giving Yoru a buff. There really isn't much else to it. They're just buffing his flash duration from 1.5 seconds to 1.75 seconds, and that's pretty much all it is. Yoru is just getting a little buff as well. So overall, I think these agent changes are very good. In terms of just like philosophy of agent design, I think this is a very good way of trying to separate the classes into kind of their own, you know, ranges of where they should really be and how they should really feel as agents. I think it's a really good change overall, and it'll be interesting to see how this affects Skye and KO meta-wise, particularly KO. You know, will that really change his pick rate overall, or will people find just like interesting techs or like, you know, interesting ways of kind of abusing the new left click flash instead? But now let's move on to Fracture, and this is courtesy of Floxe. I'm sure some of you have seen this video of some of the Fracture changes, because some of them are pretty monumental. So let's start off, and we'll start off straight away with this change here towards the lift. You can see it's gotten a bit tighter overall. There's kind of more maybe angles for defenders to hold. I think this is mainly to try and help defenders when attackers would come up here and kind of, you know, attack coming up the rope and into your spawn. I think that that's what this is designed for, right? That this is a bit of a narrower space. They can't see as much from up here as they could before, and there's kind of, you know, more spaces to potentially hide behind as well. I think that that's the intent behind this change. But then this, I don't think that'll be a major change, but this is a major change. This is an absolute humongous change to the map overall, and it's really going to impact the way that the map is played, I think. So you can see that they've added basically a ledge here on the sort of end of nest, and this is going to be a very interesting thing overall of how they, yeah, how this will impact gameplay, because the first thing is smokes, right? If you're coming from a main and you're going to attack Sands and you're going through the door, you just smoke off nest, you've dealt with nest, right? It's smoked off, we're good. But now, that isn't the case, right? You put a smoke in nest, you start to come through sand, you start to attack towards the site, but there is no reason why someone can't just flash at any time out of this smoke and just come onto this ledge and just absolutely destroy you, right? There's no reason that at any point that cannot happen, and so that is going to be a massive, massive change. Also, there's no reason that when you first smoke off this bit of nest, that someone still isn't on a higher elevation here on the rafters, right? And so when you come out of that door, now you still have to check that elevated angle. I guess you could use a Viper wall across here. I guess that's one way of potentially solving this issue. I also think Sage Wall is pretty big, and Sage is already pretty good on Fracture, and you know, I haven't played on the map myself, so I can tell you, but I think a Sage Wall across here might become quite common. You actually already see it somewhat in pro games where they wall off nest. But now with the addition of rafters as well, right, just putting a wall across here stops what I mentioned at the start, right? Now all of a sudden no one can just sneak out of a smoke and come behind you because it's walled off, right? And so I think that might be a bit of a common way of trying to deal with this as well, is just putting a sage wall up here and just, you know, really stopping anyone from coming out on the rafters as you're there. Now, this will also be handy in retakes, of course, and also maybe for attackers, right? Attackers can come up the rope and they don't have to show themselves back here. They can sit here as well. So Nest is becoming like a bit more of a battleground. Overall, I think this is more of a defensive change that makes it harder to take Sands overall. But there is some interesting play patterns, and I really love this change because it kind of adds a bit of a dynamic of like, this is now harder to take, but if you are the attackers and you take it and you come up here, you know, that's potentially a nice little power position to then hold the site from, right? It's kind of a ratty angle, right? People coming out of Nest might not expect it, particularly early on. And so, yeah. it'll definitely be interesting for both retakes and holding the retake as well. I think this little angle here, if the attackers can get into that space. Moving forward, though, we will come to drop. And again, I'm very glad that they've changed drop because, as I said, if they're making something harder to take on one side, Fracture is overall actually a pretty balanced map on the whole now, like a 50-50 map for the most part. So if they were going to make, something maybe a bit easier to defend, like initially in one area, then I was hoping that they would change something to make it a bit easier to attack, and they have here with drop. Because as you can see, drop has essentially been pushed back, as you can see just here. And obviously if you fall down now from the drop, if you fall down close to this wall here, obviously you'll have protection from people on site. If you decide to jump across over here, you'll have protection from people in CT as well. So, basically it just became a lot easier for people to drop down, which I think is a good thing as well. And I also think for retakes as well, even for defenders, who might have flanked all the way across, it's now easier for them to drop down as well. So it could benefit both sides, but obviously mainly this will benefit the attackers. But there is something else that's pretty interesting as well, which is this corner here. And I'm not sure because I can't play the map myself, but if you put a smoke here, is there a smoke that will cover someone if they're standing over here from being able to see down in nest? I'm actually not too sure. Maybe a well-placed Viper Orb could cover all of it. But like an Astra or a Brim or an Omen Smoke, I'm not actually too sure if it will cover this ledge, which is obviously a bit deeper. So that will be, if it doesn't, that's going to be very interesting. Again, a Sage Wall might be useful, or again, a Viper Orb. Maybe those two agents would get a bit better if that is the case, but without testing it myself, I can't quite be sure. So we'll have to see. But now let's move on to another massive change, which is the dish area, because you can see that they have basically destroyed. A landslide has happened on the other side of the dish, and you can no longer enter that space. The ult orb has actually moved a bit as well. I don't think that'll make a massive difference, but you can see that, yes, this whole area now is blocked off and you can't go around the dish. And I kind of have mixed feelings about this one. I overall like the other changes a lot that they made there, but this one I'm a bit more mixed on. The reason is, I like weird. I like different. And now that they've blocked that off, right, dish was kind of a bit of a unique area, and I understand the Ringa Rosie, like, that you could play around the dish at times could be frustrating, and it's like, oh, you just picked the right side, I picked the wrong side, you won the fight, well done. I understand that could be frustrating sometimes, but I did like that it was different. I did like that, it was kind of a unique aspect to the map that now has been taken away and replaced with kind of a solitary lane. But I think I do understand why they've gone for that, right? Because when the dish had the two sides to it, as soon as the attackers kind of got past this initial area here, for the defenders, it was pretty risky to stay around the dish because you didn't know which way they were going to come from, right? And so you'd end up looking one of two ways, and if you guessed wrong, you'd die, right? So it basically said to the defenders, don't try and defend, like, as soon as you've lost this initial kind of thing for them to come through, don't try and defend the dish, right? Because you could just be looking the wrong way. So retreat instead, right? And that's kind of how, for the most part, it got played. But then the actual drop itself was very difficult to come from the attackers, right? So it's very easy to take kind of the first space, but very difficult to take the second step. Whereas now, obviously, they've made the drop a bit easier, so I can understand why they'd want to make this space a bit more contested and a bit easier to defend overall. It seems like maybe a bit of a, like, oh, let's just get rid of its solution, right? Like a very basic, like, oh, we can't think of anything better, let's just brick it all up, right? It just seemed maybe like that was what they did, but I can definitely appreciate why they felt this change might be necessary overall in just making it a bit easier to defend. So that's kind of the first thing that I thought about with that. Bit of a mixed feelings on that one, but now we have this change as well, which is this area is getting a lot bigger. As you can see, it's a lot more open spaced overall. And to me, obviously, what this is kind of representing is the fact that Fracture is a map where obviously you get a lot of defensive aggression, more defensive aggression than any other map by far. And by making this space much wider, it becomes a lot more difficult to do that and push all the way out. And the reason is because now that this space is bigger, you think of agents like Breach and Neon, right? Those stuns that they throw out might not hit, right, in this wide open space, right? All of a sudden, a Breach stun becomes much easier to avoid in this space. So then it's going to make it a bit harder to overall, guarantee that your utility is hitting in this area. And it might lead to things like, I mean, certain things like a Fade Horn on here, I guess, reveals more area now overall. So maybe that will be a bit of an advantage for some agents. But I think by widening this area overall, agents like Breach, maybe Neon as well, those utility that they use when they're pushing through Arcade, might not be as useful overall. And so that is a big change. I can't tell if they've widened this out or not. It kind of looks like they have in my mind, but I'm not sure if that's just me not really realizing things. And then as we come on to B site, there isn't as many changes, it seems here. This still looks, mostly the same overall, but there is this nice little ramp, and this one is a very small change that I think, yeah, it is just kind of a nice little thing overall. So the B site seems to be staying mostly the same, it seems, but the A site has major changes to it, which should impact, kind of like the extremes of it. And I think what they clearly want here is they want all four sides to kind of be equal in terms of how you attack them, right? And I think on the B site, fair enough, you can do execs from B main. We've seen plenty of decent execs from towards Arcade as well. But on that A site, it was rarer to see a good exec come from the drop side than it was just through a main, and so I can understand that they're basically trying to balance it out. I think these changes are good overall and will add some extra, little wrinkles and complexity to the map, which will be nice. Some agents, like I say, like maybe Sage gets a bit better, but I don't think it'll be anything major meta wise. But yeah, maybe like Sage, maybe Viper get like a tiny bit better, but I haven't actually played the map myself. So that's just a guess, but very interesting changes. Let me know what you think in the comments down below about the agent and fracture changes, because I think they're all pretty interesting.